Massachusetts policymakers are in love with offshore wind. They see it as an emerging industry offering jobs, economic investment, and perhaps most importantly, a path forward for meeting the state's climate change goals. But the state's love affair with offshore wind is not shared by all. On Cape Cod, where some of the early wind farm developers want to bring their power ashore, some residents are opposing the plans because of the damage the projects might do to their local beaches and communities. Welcome to the Codcast. I'm Bruce Mole of CommonWealth Magazine, and I'm joined by two Cape residents, Suzanne Conley of Barnstable, who is fighting to protect Dowses Beach, and David Buzanowski of Falmouth, who is opposing transmission lines in that community. Suzanne, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this fight.
Okay, I'm Suzanne Conley. I retired a number of years ago as a senior executive from Massachusetts Public Higher Education, moved down to Cape Cod, which I knew pretty well from years of vacationing here and visiting here in 2016. Because of the proximity of Dowses Beach to the home we purchased, I became very interested in hearing about this proposal to bring offshore cables into Dowses Beach. And we'll get into why we think that's a huge problem in a bit.
And before we go on to you, David, tell us a little bit about Dowses Beach. What is it? Why is it special to you?
It's special to a lot of us in Barnstable because unlike the other two places that are facing the same issue, Colville's Beach and Craigville Beach in Centerville, Dowses Beach is actually a very complicated estuarine environment. It features a double embayment. It is the Centerville River is the mouth of the Centerville River drains into the larger of the two bays and really forms a watershed for a big chunk of the interior of Cape Cod. It has become, because of its nature, a wildlife refuge, not officially, but the wildlife abounds. In front of the beach is a complex habitat that should be left untouched. And one of the features of the place is a handicap accessible fishing pier that is used heavily by members of our community who are mobility impaired. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. It's accessed by a very narrow causeway. There's only one way on and one way off. And it's just a beautiful Cape Cod treasure that is a beloved spot by not only people who live in Barnstable, but around the Cape, I think.
David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Dave Buzanowski. I'm the president of the Falmouth Heights Mara Vista Neighborhood Association. I bought a house in the vicinity of Falmouth Heights, not in Falmouth Heights proper, but just outside the Heights area in 1995 and moved here officially in 2005. I'm also retired. And as president of the association, the neighborhood association, this issue came to our attention in 2020. In 2019, the administration made announcements about wind turbines being placed offshore, and we certainly had no opposition to wind-generated clean energy. That is not our issue. Our only issue came to light in 2020 when, at that time, Mayflower, the predecessor of South Coast, made it known that of their intentions of bringing their cables through Falmouth Heights. Now, Falmouth Heights is a different situation than Suzanne just described with Dowses Beach. We have a broad beach that's very populated in the summertime. It's one of the most populated beaches in Falmouth, and South Coast has also made overtures that they would either go through one or a second alternative site in Falmouth Heights, both of which would go under the same beach. Their primary site goes under Falmouth Heights Beach, and it will be horizontally, directionally drilled beneath the beach. They say 20 to 30 feet below the beach, but it will come up in a designated park. A park that was donated to the town as a gift back in 1903. And as such, the deed of gift stipulated that this particular park shall always remain open to the public and unobstructed and shall never be built on. And here we are with a situation where they're going to go right up the length of this park. So that is our primary issue.
So, Suzanne, maybe talk a little bit about what it is that's coming ashore.
Sure.
Just to give people a sense of size and scope.
Sure. The developer has proposed to land three very large cables. They're called offshore cables. Their diameter is approximately 10 to 12 inches. There would be three of them at Dowses. They start drilling offshore. One of our big concerns is the Sagamore Lens, which is a feature of the Sole Aquifer, extends seaward from Dowses Beach. And we do worry about any chance of contaminating that aquifer if the drilling goes awry in some way or goes too deep. We just don't think it's a place to drill. And then they would come up under the beach and into a parking lot where people park their cars when they're enjoying the area. And they would install three 61-foot long, 9-foot deep, 8-foot wide underground electrical vaults in this parking lot where the cables, the offshore cables, would be turned into onshore cables. They're splicing vaults, actually. We have great issues about human health and safety related to the inclusion of this really massive electrical infrastructure in such a recreational area. Following the installation of the duct banks and the splicing of the cables, they would then build a duct bank that would require them to trench the narrow causeway, which 3 times a year at least is 2 feet underwater. And then when we worry about the integrity of that causeway, if something happens, there's catastrophic failure of that causeway, which is something actually the town of Barnstable has worried about publicly in their filings. There would be no more access to that area. They then go through very narrow, historic residential streets in the village of Osterville and right through the very prosperous and well-known business district of Osterville. It's a shopping center that attracts a lot of especially vacationers and tourists, and then go 6.7 miles to a to-be-built substation north of Route 6 that they originally said would be about 16.5 acres. And they just recently told the Massachusetts EFSB that they like to make it 29 acres. And this is in a part of Cape Cod where green space is really starting to be at a premium. Across Cape Cod, undeveloped space is about 14% of the land. And in our area of Cape Cod, I think that's a huge sacrifice, 29 acres. But that's essentially the sum of the proposed project.
So for our listeners, the Vineyard Wind project, which is
yes.
the first, it's going to be hopefully the first commercial scale industrial wind farm in the United States, is coming ashore at is it pronounced Covell's Beach?
Covell's Beach, yes.
Covell's Beach, yes, on Craigville Beach. Yeah. And so I've been down there, and they have a big parking lot where this is sort of coming ashore, and sort of like what you described, Suzanne. The cable was coming ashore, and then it would go underneath this parking lot, and then head off to a substation.
Right.
And it was quite a massive undertaking during the project. But this morning I was looking at on Google at the parking lot, and it looks like nothing. You can't tell any trace of anything there, at least in my view.
Yeah, and that's something the developers tout, that they'll just be here for 3 years, and once they're gone, we won't even know they were here. Well, what they've left behind is 800 megawatts of electricity running under that particular beach. For a comparison, Bruce, the 2 cables that feed Nantucket Island, that light up Nantucket Island, together total 71 megawatts. And max usage is usually about our expert on our steering committee for Safe Greater Dustis Beach tells us that max use is about 58 megawatts. They want to put 800 under Covels, and they have built those cables in. They intend in the Park City Wind Project to put 800 more megawatts under Craigville Beach, which is one of the more popular beaches on the Cape. But both of those beaches, we don't think either of them were a great idea, although we didn't have much to say about the Covels project. They total 1,600 megawatts. What they want to put under Douses is 1,200 megawatts. Again, think of compare that to, the lines going out to Nantucket. And that was one thing the developer said to us early. What's the big deal? Lines go to Nantucket. And I looked it up. I said, well, this is a whole different kettle of fish, so to speak. And one of our issues, this is a Barnstable issue, should all three of those projects ever come online, the town of Barnstable would have 2,800 megawatts of electricity flowing under our streets, which is the equivalent to the electrical output of 4.5 Pilgrim nuclear power plants. We think that's way too much power in one municipality, especially when there are much better options to land offshore wind energy.
So that sounds very alarming, but I just want to put it in a little context. It's not this power would be going to this substation, and the reason the developers have picked Cape Cod and perhaps Barnstable specifically is because it's close to where they are. They don't have to build transmission lines that far, so they can come in, and then feed into the grid. So the power won't be used, in Barnstable necessarily. It's going to feed out into the wider New England power grid.
Well, that's exactly correct. And if I just may interject there, that's exactly one of our objections. As Suzanne alluded to, there are better sites. There have been studies done by multiple well-known consultants, one of which is known as the Brattle Group, and they recommended at a very early stage that this power is needed basically on the mainland. And there's no reason for it to come via Cape Cod. There are industrial sites on the mainland, such as Brayton Point, for example, which we applauded the South Coast Mayflower at the time's choice of taking their first 1,200 megawatts there. There should be a planned, coordinated effort in bringing these power cables ashore. There is no need for each and every wind developer to have an independent cable going ashore. They could combine these in adjacent trenches to go to one industrial site. And that's what we've been promoting since the very beginning. There is no need to come via the Cape in 4 different sites.
Suzanne, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think, we understand American entrepreneurship. I would just say that their motivations are 2. One, the federal government set 2030 as a sort of deadline that I think was unrealistic from the start, and the state followed suit. So they wanted these things online and delivering energy by 2030. And so the developers are seeing an opportunity to make heavy profit, but they could only do so and reach that 2030 deadline if they use the quickest and, quite frankly, least expensive way to land this electricity. What Dave just mentioned is referred to as the planned approach, and this is very common. And these are the lessons learned over in Europe, that the power is actually gathered offshore by an apparatus, a cable, really a big cable that lands in 2, maybe 3 industrialized zones and delivers the energy to where it's needed most, and that's heavily populated areas. Coming to the Cape, we have an expert on our steering committee, and what he says is if you need a transfusion, they don't put it through the capillaries in your finger. They put it in a major artery, and that's I think an excellent analogy that this is a lot of power. I can't overstate that. This is so much power. And, we have other concerns that are, I think, collateral, such as property values and so forth. But one of our biggest concerns, Bruce, is the fact that you're, like, for example, 3 underground electrical vaults in a parking lot with hundreds of people on a beach. These things overheat constantly, and they are susceptible to smokers, fires, and explosions. The developer told us publicly, no, we can't guarantee that we'll never have that sort of incident happen. And I can't imagine it happening. And of course, the probability is remote, but it's there. It's not zero. And I can't imagine it happening on a 90-degree day on Dowses Beach in the parking lot with one narrow means of egress on and off that place with hundreds of people there on the beach. And that's what we've said to them over and over. 3 years of construction, and they keep saying we'll pave everything over. You'll never know it. We were here, but it's there, and we have real concerns about human health and safety related to this amount of power being delivered to shore in this fashion.
Is the concern, you mentioned fires or potential for fires, or is there a danger, in your opinion, of just the power flowing through these cables out into the grid? Is that a danger to human health?
Well, one of the things we've been referring to very frequently, my group, are these Brattle Group reports. And they've indicated that there's way too much power being planned to be put into the grid on Cape Cod, and that could lead to an increased number of outages, brownouts, blackouts, grid failures, and equipment failure, which I'm sure you realize could be catastrophic. It's just so much power, and which is why they promote the what they call the planned approach. It's what the industry calls the planned approach. The developer, when we talk to them, no, we have it all set. We have to meet this 2030 deadline. Well, the new round of I think the third round of projects is just about gone, and they're going to bid on the fourth round. And we think this is a moment in time. We met with some state officials yesterday, and they were very good about hearing our concerns. And we told them this is a moment in time when you can ask these developers, hey, we are interested in developers who want to land this power in ways that don't disrupt tiny coastal, communities unnecessarily. So that's been our point all along, that there are better ways to do this. And there are a number of things. They told the federal government, our developer told the federal government, they had looked at something called the South Coast Variant, which veers off to the west and avoids small villages, and then the reuse of power plants, as Dave mentioned, that were fired by coal and gas, and those are being retired slowly. Let's take advantage of the fact that they're grid proximate and give them new, greener second lives. That just they'll need a lot of upgrades naturally, but doesn't that make more sense than going through these little villages? And then finally, the planned approach is kind of the gold standard of transmission from the outer continental shelf. And if what we say to the state all the time is, let's slow down, let's do this, but let's do this right. And it will last longer, it'll be less dangerous and less disruptive to so many lives.
David, I think Barnstable struck a deal with the developers, or at least some of the developers, to do these projects. Falmouth, I guess it sounds like the town is still up in the air about working with them. Is that right?
I would say very much so. Let me just go back and expand a little bit on what Suzanne said, and I sit here nodding at everything she was saying, because we agree 100%. Our issue is very similar to hers. The initial proposition from Mayflower at the time was to pull 3 cables of 12,000 megawatts into our community, and 7 miles up the road to a newly built substation, very similar to Suzanne's situation. South Coast now has alluded to the fact that they anticipate changing from high voltage AC power to high voltage DC power, and that would reduce the number of cables needed, possibly to 1. They have not yet refiled with the EFSB in Massachusetts, officially stating that, but they've made those announcements. The question you ask about Falmouth, there has been an issue of communication with the town. That's one of the problems. When they initially came to the town to test several sites for feasibility, they came and the town granted them permission to do testing, soil testing, without a commitment on the project from the town's side. And Mayflower proceeded with those tests, but before they even came back to the town, making an official proposal, so to speak, they filed papers with the state of Massachusetts as if it was a fait accompli. And this is the way it's going to be. And the primary site was Worcester Court in Falmouth Heights. The second alternative site was Central Park, which is a ball field where kids play on every Saturday. There's hundreds of kids there. So as of right now, the town has not granted South Coast further testing rights, and there is ongoing discussion, but nothing has been resolved.
Mm-hmm. And what's the deal, Suzanne, with the town of Barnstable that these developers have? Has the town approved these projects, and now you're trying to upset that apple cart, or how does that work?
So the Covels project was approved by through what's called a host community agreement between Avangrid, Orsted, and the town of Barnstable. And quite frankly, I'll be honest, no one in town had much of any reaction. There were, a few people who questioned it, but it was like, well, that's good. Renewable energy is good. We've got to transition. So they had a host community agreement. They're going to give the town some money over a period of 30 years or 25 years. And that was fine. They have signed a host community agreement, I believe, with the Craigville project. Yes, they have. And so that one's done. The Dowses Beach project is extremely early in the permitting process. They haven't made it out of MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act. They still have to submit something MEPA requires for them to move on to the EFSB. But the town, because of the nature of what's going on with the reneging on the contracts, and things are a little bit up in the air, although the developer insists they're going to proceed and continue with their project. The town has actually halted discussions with Avangrid on what is called a host community agreement. So that's where we stand.
Just so our listeners understand, this references to the third procurement and the projects up in the air as a reference to these projects, saying that the economic conditions that they sign their power purchase agreements under are no longer really relevant, because inflation and interest rates and the war in Ukraine have sort of turned everything upside down. So they're seeking to terminate those contracts, rebid them in the fourth round, presumably at much higher prices.
Yes.
And then move forward. So it's a very volatile time, as you say, Suzanne, in the offshore wind industry in Massachusetts.
Yes, and some news just came out about Siemens. They took a real big hit in the market yesterday. They build the big nacelles, they're called, and the guts of the wind. But again, our group is just not against offshore wind power. We just don't want offshore wind power to be done in a way that A, is not sustainable. B, is just it's just not the best way to do it. I'll say that this fourth round gives us an opportunity to just stop, take stock, and that's what we talked with state officials about yesterday. Let's take stock and let's. I asked the state to step in and take more control over interconnection. That's what this industry calls this, interconnection. And let's do it right. That's been our whole point. But I do want to say this, and this has been a point of contention for me personally, and this is my opinion. Russia invaded Ukraine, I believe, in February 22. They signed their contracts in late April, early May 22. Right. So they knew the war had started. Steel prices had already tanked. There were all sorts of issues about the economy bubbling up. I think that they felt that they could just sign on the dotted line and then work it out with the state of Massachusetts. And frankly, as a citizen of the Commonwealth, I have to give credit to the people who stood their ground and said, no, you signed a contract and this is what you have to abide by. But you're absolutely right, Bruce. New contracts will mean much higher prices, and you know who's going to pay the much higher prices. So, this is it's just not a great situation.
David,
I will say, if I could add one more thing, the planned approach is by far the least expensive way to transmit energy from the outer continental shelf. And the Brattle Group has demonstrated the cost differential. It's extreme. So they're not only are they taking a route that's disruptive to communities, they're taking a route that is most profitable to them, but is the most expensive eventually when it comes to upgrading our grid.
Well, I think if I'm hearing what you're saying, it may be that I think the coming ashore on the Cape is their cheapest alternative if everybody does it on their own, each project doing their own project. But what you're talking about is sort of consolidating a lot of these wind farms and the power producing and bringing it in a central location, which would save money in the long run, but we're not quite there organizationally yet.
Aside from just saving some money, there's also less environmental impact.
That's right.
Less onboarding of cables through residential neighborhoods, which is our major objection in both of our cases. This shouldn't be. And again, we can't forget that, as Suzanne mentioned, the fact that this is 1,200 megawatts. And do you realize how many watts there are in 1,200 megawatts? 1.2 billion watts. So, from a young age, we've been taught not to stick our fingers in a socket or whatnot, not to pick up a live wire. But it's now okay to run 350,000 volts under our front yards. There's certainly a stigma associated with that I can't imagine anyone would willfully agree to.
All right.
Well said.
Suzanne Conley, David Buzanowski, I want to thank you both for joining us today. And to our listeners, we'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks for the opportunity.